Want to start?
Well, let me thank you for humoring me and agreeing to meet. Here is what I want. One, your view of our work together and how it worked, how we did it. Two, I like your briefing of your story till now.
Well, I'll maintain a strict chronology and start with my therapy. Overall, I have to say that my therapy with you was a complete failure. A time consuming and expensive failure. I think I did my job as a patient. As far as I can recall, I was fully cooperative, worked hard, came regularly, paid my bills, remembered dreams, and followed your leads. Would you agree?
Mm-hmm.
As I recall, I saw you for 3 full years, and as much of that time we met twice a week. That's a lot of hours, at least 200, about $20,000. When I started with you, I was at the nadir of my existence, working as a chemist and developing new ways to kill insects. I was bored with my career, bored with my life, bored with everything except reading philosophy and pondering the great riddles of history. But the reason I came to see you was because of my sexual behavior. You remember that, of course. I was out of control. All I wanted was sex. I was obsessed with it. I was insatiable. I shuddered to think of the way I was, the life I led. I attempted to seduce as many women as possible. After coitus, I had a brief respite from the compulsion, but in a short while my desire took over yet again. It was only in that brief period, immediately after coitus, that I was able to live fully, harmoniously. That was when I could connect with the great minds of the past.
I remember you and your aristocrats and Zeno.
Yes, those and many others since. But the respites, the compulsion-free times, they were all too brief. I'm now liberated, now that dwell in the higher realm all the time. But let me continue to review my therapy with you. Isn't that your primary request?
Mm-hmm.
I remember being very attached to our therapy. It became another compulsion itself, but unfortunately it didn't replace the sexual compulsion, but was merely coexisting with it. I remember anticipating each hour with eagerness and yet ending with disappointment. It's difficult to remember much of what we did. I think we strove to understand my compulsion from the standpoint of my life history, figuring it out. We were always trying to figure it out. Yet every solution seemed suspect to me. No hypothesis was well argued, nor was it well grounded, and worse, not one had the slightest impact on my compulsion. And it was a compulsion. I knew that, and I knew that I had to stop cold turkey. It took a long time, but eventually I realized you didn't know how to help me. I lost faith in our work together. I recall that you spent inordinate amounts of time exploring my relationships with others, and especially my relationship with you. That never made sense to me. It didn't then, and it still doesn't. As time went by, it became painful to meet with you, and keep painful on exploring our relationship, as though it was real or enduring or anything other than what it truly was, a purchase of service. You wanted it straight? There it is.
That's straight, alright. Thanks. Now, the rest of your story.
Well, let's see. I'll start with work. My expertise in developing hormonal agents to block insect reproduction had important implications for the company, and my salary had escalated. But I grew profoundly bored with chemistry. Then at age 30, one of my father's trust funds matured and was turned over to me. It was a gift of freedom. I had enough to live on for several years, so I canceled my subscriptions to the chemistry journals, dropped out of the workforce, and turned my attention to what I really wanted in life, the pursuit of wisdom. I was still miserable, still anxious, still sexually driven. I tried other therapists, but none helped me any more than you had. One therapist, who had studied with Jung, suggested I needed more than psychological therapy. He said that for an addict like me, the best hope for release was a spiritual conversion. His suggestion led me to religious philosophy, especially the idea and practices of the Far East. They were the only ones that made any sense. All other religion systems failed to explore the fundamental philosophical questions, but instead used God as a method of avoiding true philosophical meaning and analysis. I even put in a few weeks at a meditation retreat center, and that was not without interest. It didn't halt my obsession, but nonetheless I had a feeling that there was something really important there. I just wasn't ready for it. Meanwhile, except for the interlude of forced chastity in the ashram, and even there I managed to find a few sliding doors, I continued the sexual hunt. As before, I had sex with a lot of women, by dozens, by hundreds, sometimes 2 a day, anywhere, anytime I could find them, the same as when I was seeing you. Sex once, occasionally twice with a woman, and then moving on. Never exciting after that, you know? You know that old saying, you can only have sex for the first time with the same girl once? That last comment was meant to be humor, Dr. Hertzfeld. I remember you once told me that it was remarkable in all our hours together I never once told you a joke.
And then what happened?
Then one day I reached a momentous decision. Since no therapist had helped me in any way, sorry to say, Dr. Hertzfeld, that included you.
I'm sorry to get that. No apologies needed. You're simply being honest.
Sorry, didn't mean to dwell on that. To continue, since therapy had not been the answer, I decided to heal myself. A course of bibliotherapy, assimilating the relevant thoughts of the wisest men who ever lived. So I began systematically reading the entire corpus of philosophy, starting with the Greek priest Socrates, and working my way up to Popper, Rawls, and Quinn. After a year of study, my compulsion was no better. But I arrived at some important decisions. Namely, that I was on the right track and that philosophy was my home. This was a major step for me. I mean, I remember how much you and I talked about my never being at home anywhere in the world.
I remember that too.
I decided that as long as I was going to spend years reading philosophy, I might as well make a profession out of it. My money wouldn't last forever, so I enrolled in the PhD program in philosophy at Columbia. I did well. I wrote a competent dissertation, and 5 years later, had a doctorate in philosophy. I embarked on a teaching career, and then, just a couple years ago, became interested in applied, or as I prefer to think of it, a clinical philosophy. And that brings me up to today.